Yes, y'all. And it don't stop. All right. Today is a special episode because it's something that is been pissing me off. All right. Today, February 2nd, 2017, I'll be talking about how the left eats itself. I love this expression. And it really I think defines the problems with the left. And I don't really like getting into left and right and really thinking about people. It's unnecessary classifications, and in reality, I think it creates a false divide because I don't think there is necessarily a true left and a true right. But when I say the left, what I'll be talking about today are anti-fascists and radical progressives, maybe. Although I don't know really what those are exactly. But they're the people who form the black box. Black box. Is that what they're called? Black bloc. And people who advocate for violence against people that speak out against them. People who think they know what the future holds and is trying to dictate to everyone else what the future should look like in a very regimented and controlled fashion. So whether or not that conforms to your concept of the left, that's another thing entirely, but that's what I'm talking about here. And so just a little bit of background about myself. I grew up myself being quite liberal person until I got turned on to libertarianism, which has a more individual focus that I found to be extremely appealing, primarily because how simple it is. And it works in pretty much all situations, in my opinion. And, you're welcome to debate that as well. And if there's anything I say in particular today that, doesn't strike a chord, let me know. But, the thing that I think is shared between classical liberalism, classical leftism, potentially, depending on where you want to go with that, and libertarianism, is such a really importance on free speech. Free speech being a really big deal, and it is. Let's get into presentation mode. So it really is, and it's a reason it's the first thing in our Bill of Rights, and it's concerning how quickly people are willing to throw away freedom of speech or allow free speech during times of crisis or pre-crisis. I honestly feel like we're leading towards crisis. That's going to be a function of a failed economic system, a failed crony capitalist, neoliberal, controlled economy, fascist economy that's been in the works, been in creation, for 20 years, 25, 30 years. And we're starting to kind of see the system bending and falling apart and cracking. And the more that we see that, the more radical fringe elements are coming into prominence, both good fringe, subjective, my opinion of good, and bad fringe. And the bad fringe that we're seeing is being decidedly anti-free speech. And they're doing it in a way that is a lot like how neoconservatives were willing to go against their conservative values under the guise of protecting their conservative values. And I think, one of the most awesome examples of that is when George Bush said something along the lines of, we're sacrificing the free trade or the free market to protect the free market. He said something along those lines. And really, every time I see, some hip college kid who's, throwing a rock at someone trying to get them to shut up, it's like, if you ask them, they're going to say, yeah, free speech, I'm protecting free speech, but these people don't deserve it, or, I'm killing free speech to protect it, or protect my free speech, or this is my free speech. And it's really loose and scary reasoning. And, upon close inspection, it's totally 100% against free speech. And, throwing rocks, I think, is the most intense example. And I mention that because, in the news today, a kind of infamous YouTuber named Milo was supposed to do a speech on Berkeley's campus, and like happens, I think, most of the time, he goes somewhere, he was getting protests, and there was a lot of violence and lighting stuff on fire because they didn't want him to speak, and so they were there to physically prevent him. And so, a lot of people in the blogosphere or the Facebook or whatever, they act like it's really courageous and fantastic that this is being done, when in fact it's total cowardice. It really is. I mean, if you want to discredit someone, you do so in an avenue that allows for some sort of dialogue. So if someone disagrees with this Milo guy, talk. Say why he's wrong. Engage him in debate. Or ignore him. And don't amplify his message if it's that, egregious. But instead what happens is they resort to violence to attempt to limit his free speech. They're saying, what you're saying is so wrong that I unilaterally, or us collectively have unilaterally decided that what you're saying is so unacceptable that it can't be uttered. Now, first off, obviously that's a horrifying precedence they're setting. But, take that aside. Let's talk about the pragmatism of it. You take someone who is saying something so disagreeable that a large enough size of people are willing to go out and protest. So what's the concern? He's saying stuff people don't like. Hey guys, let's go into the yard. Let's go into the college yard and talk about how we don't like what he's saying. Okay, everyone here agrees? Okay, so, we're all more or less normal people. We all agree that what he's saying doesn't make sense, isn't right, whatever. If that's the case, what's your concern? Why are you scared to let him talk? If he's saying stuff that doesn't make sense and is not resonating, his message is going to die. The only way his message gains any credence is if you give it credence, is if you go up to him and punch him in the face or light your campus on fire and it becomes a international news story. This is how this guy made his career. He's a professional troll. And he's not an intellectual powerhouse, I don't think. I've never really listened to him, but he's not bringing anything new to the table. His ideas aren't new. He's a mashup of ideas with an extravagant package that that's not the type of package I'm talking about. And people are eating it up. So it's like if you're, let's look at it from a pragmatist lens. Every time someone tries to limit someone's free speech, not every time, but more often than not, you're amplifying their message by making them a martyr, by making them a victim. And it's the same, and it's so weird because it's like, you think people would learn this. This is the lesson to me from the 2001 on. How do you create a terrorist? It's the same concept. How do you create a terrorist? You marginalize them, and then you legitimize them, and then they can recruit other terrorists. If you're a crazy person in your town in the Middle East somewhere, or anywhere, right? Anywhere. If you're some crazy person and you're in the town square screaming bloody murder about how we're about to be murdered and how we have to fight back and we have to let's say we have to become suicide bombers because that's our way of fighting back, or we need to train, or we need to set up special schools for creating soldiers, you're going to look like a crazy person if there's no context to back that up, right? You're just going to be a crazy person in the square and no one's going to pay you any mind. Just like if you're Milo and you're crazy, saying crazy shit in an empty auditorium to 200 people even, it's the same thing. It's the equivalent of being the crazy person in the square. That being said, if you're the crazy person in the square and your town gets drone bombed and a wedding gets destroyed and they're innocent people killed, all of a sudden you seem really legitimate. People say, wait, that crazy guy who's saying all that bullshit was right. So maybe the other crazy shit he said is right. And maybe he is more legitimate than I thought. Maybe let me do a little bit more research. And then the bombings continue and the chaos continues. And more, all of a sudden, this guy is way more legitimate. Let's give him power. And all of a sudden, crazy person's in charge. Well, guess what? Same thing applies. You take someone like Milo. I don't know this. I honestly don't know this Milo guy enough. So let's take anyone you have disagreeable views, though, and you make them the martyr. And you make them the victim, and everything they're saying all of a sudden starts to look reasonable because you're validating their claims. They're saying, I'm being victimized and no one wants to hear my message because it's so important, blah, blah. I mean, any idiot can make that argument, play the victim card. It's easy. Identity politics has showed us that, So get your heads out of your asses, for real. I mean, you're doing the exact opposite of what you attempt to do. And so, the rock thing, throwing rocks, burning shit obviously is the most egregious example. Easy to knock down, in my opinion, although there are people who think it's super cool to punch a Nazi. Well, you know what? Fuck you. You guys are idiots. And, it makes its way into the conversation. And I'll use this word, whether it's correctly or not, the leftist playbook of quieting dissent and limiting free speech is through the use of labeling people, of putting people in boxes, of throwing accusations. And me personally, it's not like uncommon, my experience. I'm sure it's happened to many people, but I've been labeled and called misogynist, sexist, racist, and thrown all sorts of is when I'm willing to converse with people, which isn't all the time. I mean, I'm a fairly keep to myself person. I don't generally give my own thoughts on stuff unless asked. But when I see something really disagreeable, I do speak up. And this is one of the things that I find extremely disagreeable. And so I've been willing to enter dialogue and debates with people around, is it okay to punch a Nazi? Or is this sort of violence good and effective or appropriate? Right? And what'll happen is I will be attacked personally, and not based on my views, not based on what I'm saying, but the words and the labeling and the branding of who I am all of a sudden brings into question. So they're not going to debate you on what you're saying, and they haven't learned anything from this. They're not going to say, listen, what Trump is saying is wrong, and here's why factually. They're going to say, no, Trump is wrong because he's a bad person. Whether or not he's a bad person doesn't matter unless we're talking about something that it directly relates to. So if you call someone a sexist and you're talking about something where sex is not a variable, where gender is not a variable at all, and you say, no, you're a sexist actually, and I don't need to listen to you. No, you're wrong. It doesn't matter if the person's a sexist. If you're talking about something that doesn't have anything to do with sexism or misogyny, if you bring up race in a conversation that doesn't involve race, you are throwing in a wrench into a conversation. And that's the goal. Every time that's the goal, is to silence someone. It's for them to start defending themselves and say, no, I'm not racist. No, I'm not sexist. Instead of talking about the real topic, whatever it is you're really talking about. So you know what? The next time someone calls you a sexist, misogynist, racist, and you're talking about something totally different, you're talking about the economics of oil or whatever it is you're talking about, and someone throws the you're a sexist, ignore it. Just keep talking. And they're going to freak out because that's their go-to weapon. And it's only valuable to them if it elicits a reaction. So be like, someone calls you a sexist, okay. Say, okay, I'm a sexist. Let's keep talking though. I'm not going to be derailed. You're not going to silence me. You're not going to shame me. I'm not going to give you any weight to your argument. And not because you're a dumb girl, not because I think I'm better than you, but because what you're saying is irrelevant and because you're trying to silence my free speech. You're trying to make me censor myself so I don't come off as being something I'm not. Or, maybe even I am, but it doesn't matter. If we're talking about something that doesn't matter, you don't need to agree with everything people are in order to have a conversation. People need to realize that. That is the beauty of free speech, in fact. So, okay, I guess I already talked about this. I'm punching people you disagree with. Don't do it. Don't do it, because you know what? The rationale that people apply to making it all right to punch someone is used against you as well. So if you say, listen, I'm going to punch this fascist because what he's saying is disagreeable, and he's advocating for a world that I don't want to live in. He's advocating for a world of violence, so I'm going to use violence against him. Well, guess what? You just played into his game, right? So I've been watching a lot of Jedi cartoons. I love them. The Jedi, we can learn a lot from them. And Master Yoda says, listen, if you're fighting a strong opponent, you don't try to match their strength. You don't try to out-strengthen them. You use something else. You act smarter than them. You act faster than them, right? You do something that they're not equipped to handle. So if the fascists speak the language of violence, which is mostly true. I mean, people talk about fascists and they really only talk about the last 10% of a fascist state, which is like the boot coming down, and they don't mention the economics, which I highly recommend you learn about. You got to go read this free PDF on FEE, F-E-E, Freedom, I don't know, Foundation of Economic Education. There's a book by Larry Flynn, and it's called As We Go Marching. It documents fascism. It's fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. It explains what is going on way too closely to what's going on now, and it's horrifying, but at the same time, it's very clarifying. And if you're feeling confused, which I know a lot of people are, I really recommend it. But listen, if the fascists, if they're power players that are trying to violently control people, right, then why would you resort to violence? It validates their beliefs. It gets them ready to fight back using violence, right? And it's so, the rationale is just so weak that if you put down on paper what anti-fascists believe and what fascists believe, there's 100%, but there's a huge overlap. The anti-fascists are the new fascists, and I believe that 100%. And the only people that, don't see that are maybe the ones that are too deep in it to realize that they are the useful idiots. For real, because, you guys got to read this As We Go Marching book, but guess what? Do you know, the history of the fascists? Do you even know what they're about? Do you know how the fascists and the people that we describe as the fascists came into power? Well, first off, the fascists came into power before the jackbooted thugs took control, right? So there's the fascists in the button-up suits with the fake economic degrees that talk about how we can use the state to prop up our domestic industries. And then there's the fascists that take control when the market downturns and debts come due and they need to find someone to blame it on and kill or throw out. It's a shitty future and a shitty past in that regard. So, fuck, God, what was I saying? So these fascists, right? I was saying something about them. Oh, man. First time I've lost my train of thought doing these podcasts. All right, I'll move on to the next thing. God damn it. All right. Oh, okay, so I was talking about the history of fascism and how they came to being. So, yeah, guess what, guys? Guess what? You guys think yourself as leftists, you anti-fascist people. Well, guess what? The fascists were leftists. Yeah. Look at the fascist manifesto. It has all the goodies you like. It has a minimum wage. It has collectives. It has all those goodies. So nice. Except for obviously it doesn't fucking work at all. So you know what? You guys claim to be anti-fascist. Why don't you learn what a fascist is? Why don't you learn that, in fact, you are fascist? And then embrace it, Embrace it. You guys can be... You don't have to call yourself fascist, but why anti-fascist? Why not get a little cool? Get a new name. Get modern. Fascismo is so old school. You guys can come up with something better than that. And so I hope I pissed some of you off, because you guys really need a wake-up call For real, it's really pathetic. So the next question that maybe someone's feeling is like, okay, you've destroyed my worldview. Good, I hope I did. But what can we do? Like, we still want to protest. We want to do something that matters. And protesting is great. There's nothing wrong with protesting. Don't make it seem like I'm just trying to be this keyboard warrior who's preventing you from expressing your own self, because that's obviously not what I'm trying to do. I'm pro free speech, and protest is a great way to express yourself and provide voice, but do it in a meaningful way. And what I think are meaningful ways is when you do stuff that people are trying to prevent you from doing, right? So, it's Black History Month right now. I've been seeing some great videos about the civil rights movement and what they were accomplishing, what they were about. And like, when you look at their protests, they weren't protesting without a cause. They were protesting to do stuff that they were being told they can't do, right? The most powerful protests were started when people said, listen, you can't do this. You can't be in this section of the restaurant, this bus. You can't be in this school. You can't. And people were like, okay, I'm going to do it anyway. Whoa, you're going to do it anyway? That's cool. That's protesting. Right? And the thing is, we're doing protesting all the time, and you just don't realize it. Every time you download something illegally, you're protesting. Every time you send an encrypted message, you're protesting. Every time you send a Bitcoin transaction, you're protesting. These are huge, radical things, right? Good things, Every time you learn something new that's going to challenge the status quo, you're protesting. You're doing stuff that people are either saying you can't do or shouldn't do. And that's great. And, even getting into the street and protesting something like that we saw at JFK and the other airports where people were being detained and saying, no, you can't be detaining these people. We want to prevent you from detaining these people or detaining us, Great, good. So here's where it doesn't get good. It's like, protests aren't good if your version of protest is not preventing people from doing. What did I mean by that? So basically, if your concept of a protest is, Joe's saying something I don't like, let's stop him. I don't find that as be a very effective protest. It's not about you then at that point. It's not about you and your beliefs. It's about stopping someone else and their beliefs, right? It's an inherently negative thing. And you're defining yourself and what you believe in or what you're trying to accomplish based on someone else. So just in that, you're giving them power. And the one caveat to that is there is a form of protest where you create an additional cost to your perceived enemies. And so I don't like thinking in a binary enemy, not enemy way, or, I don't think in those terms. And in fact, kind of like the looking for your enemy thing is very played out. Like the rulers, the people in charge figured out that if they are a clear target, a clear enemy, they can be killed easier now than ever before. And so what we're up against is not a system of individuals or specific things that can be deemed enemies, but more pervasive system. And to fight a system, you have to replace it with a better system. That's my view. But if you're fighting the current system and you see it as not working, there is the tactic of making it not work even more, which I think also has merit. So if you are to do like a protest where you walk out of your job, whether or not that's effective is not always clear, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to increase the cost of something you disagree with. And, to whatever extent you're successful, good for you. Just don't do it at the expense of free speech, and don't do it at the expense of, as by describing this as a cost-benefit analysis, you have to think about the benefit that you're providing to your opponent as well, right? So you can make something more costly. So for Milo to talk at UC Berkeley became more costly because the security, the security necessary for him to even attempt to speak there was, higher, and ultimately he wasn't able to. So the cost was so high that he couldn't even speak. But what was the benefit you provided him? The benefit is millions of dollars of free advertising, right? So you got to think about it in these terms. There's this exchange. There's this benefit cost exchange, and it has to go into this thought process, I think. So those are my thoughts. I think I rambled a little bit too long today, but it's something that's been really upsetting me. You know, there's so much cool stuff going on, and it's really being underreported. And I'm hoping that on Bad Mirror TV we'll be able to highlight, or rather, people will be able to highlight these cool things, and we'll get out of this cycle of seeing either ridiculously stupid things or ridiculously disagreeable things in repeat on cycle, where everyone's just feeling like chaos and feeling bad about themselves. It's truly unnecessary, and I think that type of environment, is where you get people who are willing to compromise their values, like free speech and like actual liberal values, for this imposter. And I'm interested to. I'm not that interested to hear what people have to think about this. Honestly, this is what I think, and I hope you found it. If you agreed with me, I don't know. I hope I didn't waste your time too much. And if you disagree with me, I hope it makes you think a little bit, think twice about who you associate with and whether or not they hold the values that you hold, or whether or not you're being an accomplice to something that you upon further inspection really don't want to be part of. And I do say that. Do reach out to me if you're interested in learning about, if you're interested, like, oh, what are there other options out there other than these protests that we're seeing that are kind of have unclear goals, and maybe I'll make another video about that. So I don't know. Reach out if you're interested. I can send you to some things I find interesting. We can have a conversation, talk about what your interests are and where they might align with the future or whatever. But I don't know. What the fuck do I know? All right. Peace, folks.